Good evening. My name is Matthew Ogden. Today is Friday, August 30th, 2013, and you're joining us at this very dramatic moment in history for a live webcast featuring Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Joining me in the studio today is Jason Ross, and we will be engaged in a series of questions that have come in from many different layers over the course of tonight's proceedings. We're going to begin tonight's webcast with a question which has come in from some Washington-based contacts regarding, obviously, the events that are on everybody's mind. The question reads as follows. Mr. LaRouche, given the events yesterday in the British Parliament and the widespread bipartisan congressional demands that President Obama obtain legislative approval before any military action is taken against Syria, and given the actually dubious natures of the evidence made public so far, how do you view the possibility of U.S. military action against Syria at this moment? This is a very fast-moving situation. It would appear that the Obama timetable for launching military strikes against Syria before he leaves for the G20 summit next Tuesday has been thrown seriously off. You have raised the absolute danger of any military action leading to a general war that would escalate to a thermonuclear war of extinction. Others have also warned that Syria can be the trigger for World War III. Another question has also emerged in the context of the intensified public debate over the Syria situation. This is the second part of our question. Given your accurate warning of a dangerous escalation if there is any U.S. military strike, and given the demand that a thorough investigation must be conducted into the alleged chemical weapons incidents, would it not be appropriate to present any solid evidence to the International Court of Justice at The Hague rather than launch unilateral military action that would itself be a violation of international law? And, of course, if President Obama were to order military strikes without first getting official congressional authorization, this would also constitute an impeachable crime. Thank you.
Well, the first part of the question, I think, is now become obvious by the course of events as they have occurred in this time. The other question is much more interesting. As of Thursday evening, I had three possible options on the explanation of what might be the causes and results of what the discussion up to that point. By the time of the morning, of this morning, the things had changed considerably. It became evident that there was a general shutdown of the support for Obama in international circles. This expressed itself in various ways. And it took my third option, which was that they were going to dump Obama. So that dump Obama likelihood has now become much more substantive, shall we say, than before. So that may be the answer, because you have now a situation of a confused, bewildered President Obama, who's now floundering, wondering whether he can actually dare to go ahead with what he intended to do. So that, meantime, when the British Parliament cut him off, that was a crucial point which made it clear to everyone, along with the rest of the other reactions to this from other sources, that Obama was held out to die or whatever. And I think that is probably the most probable situation now. This does solve some problems, but it also leaves other problems unanswered. The problems that remain to be answered, is he going to be thrown out? Because the appropriate thing would be his intention in this direction, and every sign that he was going ahead on this on his own, with the assurance that he was going to get by with it, indicates that he's taken a really serious psychological blow. He's now caught in the cold. He's out in the cold, essentially. And this is necessary because if probably the time has come to dump him. That would be my expectation, and I think that others have that view, because the mechanism of events, the way the British deserted him, that others have deserted him, he's hanging out to dry. I don't know how wet he is, but he's out hanging out to dry anyway. So I think the situation has somewhat changed, though all the cautions and precautions which I've indicated and others have indicated heretofore still stand. But the change now is he is a president in isolation on the brink of trying to start World War III. That's the reality. And the British have, I don't know about the Queen, but the Parliament has dumped him. And other people have dumped this process. So I think we have a respite of some degree. The question is, who's going to carry the ball in taking the measures which must be taken instead of those kinds of measures which have been under the Obama administration's direction before? And that we're going to have to watch carefully, and we're going to have to be very active, because I think a lot of our people who are potential leaders in the United States don't have the nerve or the quality of nerve necessary to take the necessary actions. And that's going to be the challenge, I think, which we'll run into in our discussion tonight.
Well, this will be a follow-up. As you said, the British Parliament did vote down any military action in Syria. And not only that, they also forced Prime Minister Cameron to deny any recourse to the use of the royal prerogative, which, of course, in England, the crown is sovereign, and under their non-existent constitution, you don't need parliamentary approval or not. However, ironically, in this situation, the tables have turned, and now Obama is looking like he will evoke royal prerogative, even though this is supposedly the United States of America. Now, over the last 48 hours, what we've been seeing is an extraordinary kickback from senior members of the military, both in the UK and here in the United States. And on both sides of the Atlantic, the obvious parallels are being drawn to the Iraq invasion based on falsified intelligence, which is something which you were intimately involved in at that time. Two of the highest-ranking former generals in the United States, Anthony Zinni and Barry McCaffrey, have both gone on television over the last 24 hours with major television interviews strongly opposing Obama's rush into war. So this is an indication of what's happening on the inside of the U.S. military. And finally, apropos to what you just raised about guts, it seems like some members of Congress are beginning to grow a spine and stand up in defense of the constitutional separations of power when it comes to war, as mandated in the U.S. Constitution. As people know, there's been a letter that has circulated from Virginia Congressman Scott Ridgell, which has now gained almost 150 co-sponsors, which is both Republicans and Democrats. This is saying that if engaging our military in war in Syria when there's no direct threat to the United States and without prior congressional authorization would violate the separation of powers that is clearly delineated in the Constitution. And there's also a similar letter from Representative Barbara Lee with 53 co-sponsors now, the heads of the Congressional Black Caucus and the Progressive Caucus. And then finally, of course, Congressman Walter Jones has his HCR 30, which states that going to war without the consent of Congress is unconstitutional and indeed constitutes an impeachable offense. Now, these statements have been reiterated today on television interviews. Scott Ridgell pointed out the irony of the British Parliament engaging in a robust debate while the United States Congress is nowhere to be found. Senator Rand Paul emphasized that under our Constitution, Congress authorizes war and nobody else. And then, as was said by many people, the situation now looks very much like Obama is operating as if he has the king's army, an executive with absolutely no bound. So the situation that we found ourselves in even prior to this week, even before the drums of war started beating, was that the temperature was already rising around the issue of impeachment. Numerous congressmen had begun invoking the impeachability of President Obama already. Senator Tom Coburn had said at a town hall meeting that Obama is perilously close to being impeachable. Representative Blake Farenthold told a town hall meeting in his district that he believes that there would probably be sufficient votes in the U.S. House to impeach Obama. So, in light of the immediate danger now of war being launched, would you concur that the most appropriate action, the most appropriate course of action that Congress could take at this moment would be immediately to fly back to Washington, reconvene, and begin impeachment proceedings at the soonest possible date?
In principle, those are the measures that must be taken. We cannot leave this thing handling as a gambling game. That's where we stand. And what we need is really an impeachment of this president, because we have a crisis, a monetary crisis, a financial crisis, and related crises which must be dealt with. And as long as this president lingers on, and as long as his supporters linger on in this thing, we have a mess. What we need immediately is a Glass-Steagall reenactment. Just plain reenactment. No frou-frous, no changes, no nothing. Just reenact the original bill. That's the best way to do it. It avoids the need to have a discussion of a change. And the original bill is sufficient for its purposes, under these conditions especially, and therefore we should just stick to reenacting Glass-Steagall, period. Now what that would do, it would eliminate, as we know, it would cause a chain reaction which would eliminate Wall Street as a factor. Wall Street might still exist in reduced capacity because Wall Street has outstanding recirculating debts in perpetuity. Now that is obviously junk, and somebody is going to have to clean that mess up. The best way to do it is put in Glass-Steagall immediately, reenact Glass-Steagall, assemble to do that. That will solve the problem, because it will solve also the problem of how we are going to have to react in order to restore the economy that the previous two presidencies, Bush and Obama, have ruined. I mean, there were messes and problems before then. But it was when young Bush came in and then Obama that the real mess occurred, the damage. So what we want to do is we get back to the point before young Bush became president, clean the mess up there, and then go to the process, the congressional process, the other processes of cleaning up the act and cleaning up the mess afterward. But we're going to have to go back to a original Glass-Steagall immediately. If you try to modify it, adjust it, and so forth, you're going to create a debatable mess. And what we need is very clear direction now. We have to restore the U.S. economy, which does not virtually exist now. The only way we can do that is Glass-Steagall, the original Glass-Steagall, and put that to work immediately. Because we have a starving population, we have crises, all kinds of things, messes. And we've got to get a very simple, clear action which restores the United States to a Glass-Steagall policy. If that is done, then ordinary legislation and other measures, related measures, will be sufficient to restore the functioning of the economy. There'll be lots of things that have to be done. But with Glass-Steagall installed, we are then in a situation to go back to normal, or to what we were before. And that's what we've really got to. We've got to think in terms of not the merits of this legislation, or that legislation, or this debate, or that debate. We don't have the time. And we can't take drastic measures without precedent. So therefore we have to return to the Glass-Steagall standard, reenact Glass-Steagall immediately, and let the effect of reenacting Glass-Steagall have the impact which does the job for us of creating the situation where we can go back to business.
Well, on that question, it's been on the front of people's minds over the last week, especially with the escalation towards war that Obama is now engaged in. The warning that you issued 3 weeks ago during the course of the convention of the National Caucus of State Legislators in Atlanta, Georgia, where another kind of war was in full swing, a war of the J.P. Morgan and Wall Street banking representatives against the American people. And this war was over the issue of Glass-Steagall. This is now continuing. We have reports that there are J.P. Morgan representatives walking the hallways of the Sacramento State House in the California State Legislature with $6,000 suits on and Rolex watches, trying to intimidate California legislators to back off from their resolution for Glass-Steagall, and we can be sure that that's happening elsewhere as well. However, the warning that you issued at that time during the course of the events in Atlanta was that the level of hysteria that these Wall Street bankers are exhibiting in response to this Glass-Steagall fight shows you that they understand that their system is finished, that there's nothing there to defend. But they know that the only recourse is to declare war against the American people and to crush the American people by denying them the right to restore Glass-Steagall. And at that time you said, because this system is in such a state of systemic collapse, as evidenced by this hysteria that we saw coming out of Wall Street, we could see on the very near horizon the danger of the outbreak of global war. And now that forecast is on people's minds, and maybe you could comment on that.
We have to just simply push Glass-Steagall through immediately. That's what we have to do. And because every other combination of actions will not work. That is, will not work the way we want it. Yes, we have to have a Glass-Steagall installed. We have to get these guys out. Now, what we have to do is also tell some facts, because the public is not really aware of all of the relevant facts. Wall Street and what it represents is already hopelessly bankrupt. Remember this, what they've done is they are not debts which are marked as debts and then sit there until somebody comes up and reclaims them. What they're doing is they're just recycling more and more of this hyperinflationary accumulation of documents and never accounting for a resolution of the indebtedness. So they just keep passing these things among each other with an increased price tag as they go along. All right, now that's what you've got to stop. And you've got to bankrupt these people. And they should be bankrupted because what they've done is a theft. They're claiming that they have a property, titled property, in the form of all these recycled worthless debts. Well, we don't have. Our position must be these debts are not honest debts. They're a swindle that was pulled under certain kinds of conditions. They used Glass-Steagall repeal in order to do this. But their assets are not real. They are not honest assets. They're not honest debts. They're just gambling money. It's like the board game of gambling. Boardwalk. This is Boardwalk. A game. A mere game. It has no merits, no logic whatsoever, no honest logic at all. Get rid of it. Now, because what do they intend to do with these debts that they have? Their debts. Their gambling debts. What are they going to do? Well, not too far from now, if things go on the way they're going, you're going to reach a point where Wall Street repudiates its debts because they can't carry it. So the intention is that all these Wall Street characters out there who are thinking that this is their money, that their game, they're kidding themselves, because 90% of the people who think they own Wall Street are going to find themselves out on the street if they can make it that far. So that all these guys who are backed up by on this part are doing, that's their intention. They intend to cancel their debts to everyone. Simply say, we have to clean the thing up. We've got to make a general reform. We're going to cancel this, cancel that, and cancel it. It's like, you know, it's a kind of thing we saw in the past in Europe and the United States. So therefore, the thing that has to be done, the American people have to know that even these Wall Street guys who think they're the kings of something or other, some substance, don't realize that the situation is such that sometime by Christmas time, perhaps, they will be hanging from the tree because they will not have any assets because these guys will cancel, repudiate their debts. They've done it before, and they will do it again. So once it's clear to even the Wall Street characters, all these street type writers, that this is what the intention is, just look at the debt. Look at the magnitude of this debt. Look at the cost of maintaining this debt alone. Look at the fraudulent character of this debt that has no substance to it. There's nothing you can go to get a resolution of this obligation. They simply are going to have to cancel it. This goes together with the Queen's policy of reducing the population of the planet from 7 billion people to 1 or less. That is her stated policy. That is what they are doing. So the intention is, okay, if we're going to reduce the population of the planet to less than 1 billion people, rather than the 7 billion that's been recently there, then what are you going to do under those circumstances? So the best thing we can do is get rid of Wall Street. And the way to do it is say, gentlemen, you owe us some money. You owe the nation some money. You have promises to pay. You never pay. You just reinvest and expand the debt. You keep the gambling game going. It's the board game of gambling. This is boardwalk. And the logic now is, the problem is most people don't understand how this system works. Therefore, even people on Wall Street don't know how this thing works. They are not reading the signs that we're on the verge of where Wall Street itself will cancel most of its debts. So that's where the fun begins. And that has to be made clear to the American people, and especially the Wall Street crowd who think that they're king this or that. They're not. They're about to be cut off and dumped in the street of the rest of them, except for a few privileged people. Like a general repudiation of their debt, their international debt. That's what we're on the verge of. And we can deal with it. Glass-Steagall will enable us to deal with this with great pain for many people in Wall Street, but no increased pain for the citizens of the United States.
Well, let me ask you about something we're going to do after we get Glass-Steagall. Given your role in designing, fighting for the Strategic Defense Initiative, you seem to be the perfect person to ask about the current threat of thermonuclear war, which Obama and his controllers are pushing for. There's a couple of different directions this could go, obviously. On the one hand, there's the need to prevent the Syria war from occurring, which would lead to a broader conflict, which involved Russia and China. The horror of contemplating the effects of such a war should lead any sane person to act to stop it, or any other things that would lead in that direction. But you've also identified a second direction which we ought to take, going back to the SDI program and into your current calls for a strategic defense of Earth, a cooperation between the U.S., Russia, China, and others against threats both here on Earth and from our neighboring surroundings in space. We've got the threat from both sides of the possible extinction of the human species. So let me ask you this. if we succeed in removing, or when we succeed in removing the power of the Anglo-Dutch system over our nation and the world, what would the nature of strategic relations be among nations in the thermonuclear age? It seems that a U.S., Russia, etc. SDE program based on technology sharing and collaborative development of new technologies would be a keystone in such an effort. Could you address this deeper challenge?
Well, we have some discussion in our own ranks on these related questions, including from the basement team. And what we're looking at now is the fact that what we need is to increase the energy flux density of the international system, which means that we shall be going to thermonuclear fusion as a driver of a recovery of the world system. This means changes in the water system and everything else. These things are already there. They're already implicitly there. So what we have to do is we have to create a high energy flux density driver specifically focused on the United States in one part, but the United States, especially from the Mississippi River on westward, into across the Pacific, up to the Arctic region, and so forth, and around the world. So in that case, we take the case of China. China has now been pushed into a situation where it realizes that its present status is uneasy, to say the least. Therefore, they realize that Europe is collapsing. That is, the European economies are disintegrating. Other parts of the world, their economies are disintegrating. China was pulled into a role in 2-3 decades now. And this role was of promise for them, they thought. But then they saw that the collapse of Europe, the collapse of the economy of the United States, was putting China in a position in which its previously established policy will not function effectively. So now, therefore, we realize that the whole region, and we take, for example, the Mississippi River as a point where we have a crisis in water, crisis in the ability to produce food, all these kinds of things. And this extends across the Pacific into China, into northern Russia, that part of Russia, up to the Arctic, and around the world. So if we follow this kind of policy, which is perfectly feasible in principle, it doesn't mean you can get instant results right away, but you set a program into place of this type, it will work. It can work. The technology exists. So what we have to do is concentrate on saying, well, look, we've got a population in the United States. We can, under the Obama and the previous Bush family in government, we can no longer maintain the feeding of the population of the United States. And what Obama has done in particular has meant the guaranteed death of starvation of many of our citizens in this country. So therefore we have to immediately change that policy, go to a higher technology policy, kill the green policy. Because under the green policy, Americans cannot live. They will die. Under a continued green policy, they will die en masse because we are not providing enough food, and the amount of food available is decreasing per capita, particularly with these other kinds of things. So therefore, what we have to do is we have to think about, instead of trying to fix something as it is, because what is can no longer be fixed. We have to go back to resuming scientific and technological progress as the policy on which we base the future of the United States, the future of the Pacific region, the future of China, the future of Japan, so forth and so on, the future of India. All of these things depend upon this change. And we obviously in the United States have a global mission consistent with our original founding as a nation, is to use our own powers, our own constitution, as the instrument which is used for the benefit not only of our own nation, but those of other nations. And we have to say, we have to get across to the American people and other people exactly what this is, what the options are, why it will work, how it will work. These are all things that are known to many among us. And we just simply have to make this into a program. What you do then is you say, okay, the recovery of the United States from an absolute disaster now pending depends upon going back to Glass-Steagall. We use the Glass-Steagall, which is actually a constitutional concept, because that was the way the United States organization was founded, was with the equivalent of Glass-Steagall. So we have to go back to that instrument, focus everything we do on that economic instrument, the instrument of economic policy, a single policy which it fits us and our needs and fits also the needs of cooperating nations across the Pacific and so forth. And that's the way we have to look at this. We've got a complex problem. What you have to do is take the point of advantage where you can control the problem. Use that mechanism of control to organize the recovery of not only the United States, but the benefit of nations around the world. So take the Mississippi River north, look westward, go west, young man, cross the Pacific, go into Asia, and build a system of high technology, very high technology, led by thermonuclear fusion, which is a feasible technology now. How far we can go and extend it now is going to take time. But by our commitment to doing that means that we can solve this problem on a planetary basis. Which means then, if we're going to save the United States from bad things out there in space, we're going to have to do the same thing. We're going to have to use thermonuclear fusion as the instrument to defend the United States against destruction in the solar system. Yeah. So therefore, we have to have a single focal point on which we can educate the American people generally to understand exactly what this is. No tricks, no secret moves, but plain, honest facts. What measures will have to be taken, starting with Glass-Steagall, which become feasible through Glass-Steagall, to cooperate with other nations from the Mississippi River going westward around the world. And that is a policy which we can entrust to our successors. This will work. It will work on the planet, and it will work in defense of the planet, all at the same time. Keep it simple. Look at this single measure which gives you the greatest advantage in doing the job. And that's what we've got to do.
Well, let me ask you more on the same topic, because over the past few months there's been renewed excitement over a very large fusion program, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, the ITER, being built currently in France. It's the world's largest superconducting tokamak fusion project. The governments involved in it cover over half of the world's population, including US, Russia, India, China, Japan, South Korea, the EU. Despite funding problems over the years, certain basic aspects of the design have been finalized, the project is moving forward, and the man in charge of constructing the ITER, Ken Blackler, recently said that we've now started for real. Industrial manufacturing is now underway, so the timescale is more certain, and many technical challenges have been solved. They hope to have their first plasma produced in 2021. It's a big project. Despite the excitement around the motion on the ITER, however, much of the coverage concludes by saying that even with these developments, the development of fusion power is still at least 5 to 6 decades away, which is a longer span of time than predictions of fusion several decades ago were. So the problem with these assessments is that they're looking at the issue from the standpoint of the general economic and strategic framework that we've had for the past 50 years since the assassination of Kennedy, and which has gotten worse since young Bush and Obama. But the real factor that's been preventing it, the Anglo-Dutch imperial system, is now potentially disintegrating before our eyes. With that elimination, with the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall and a Hamiltonian credit system, what would you say are the assessment for the prospects of developing a fusion economy? What role can this play in an economic recovery for the U.S. and other nations?
I think the problem is that the politicians have gotten in on this thing. Serious scientists have not been really consulted on this from that standpoint. What we've done in science, we've always succeeded in science driver programs by leaps. What you do, instead of trying to build a base up slowly, inch by inch and inch, which is what they talk about. They talk about practical. They're talking about the financial system. They're talking about the monetarist system. Now, the monetarist system doesn't work. It's not intended to work. Against it, the British system, look, the British represent what, 60% potentially of the world's wealth and control. And these and other related groups of people, simply do not want to take those measures. We could start, within this year. We could start within this year the launching of a program, which would be a fusion program, a fusion energy program. I've been dealing with fusion energy, in peripheral and various other ways over decades now. So we're not that far behind. Some people have their heads that far behind or up someplace in the wrong place. But the point is, we have the ability to rapidly go by known methods of the past and make breakthroughs in terms of designs. And don't go by the political decision makers. The political decision makers in Europe are failures. Every nation in Europe has proven itself to have been a catastrophic failure in the recent periods. And you want to take their advice? An habitual failure, you've got a few people who want to push this program, which makes a great deal of sense. But we can get to work on this without having to go through this kind of political mishmash. And that's what we have to do. And what we have to do essentially, we've got people out there. Once we get Glass-Steagall in, and people get their confidence back because Glass-Steagall is in, and they know that the end, this terrible thing is ending. We're going back into business. At that point, then ask the same questions all over again, and look at what the designs we're working on. And our resources are modest, but what we know can be done. How fast it's going to work, we don't know, but these kinds of suggested programs are just nonsense. We just have to say, first of all, do simple things that you can do. Get government organized to support those simple things that we can do. Like starting to rebuild our water system, which nothing is being done on it. To build our crop production by aid of that. Rebuild California so it's a respectable place again. That sort of thing. We destroyed it with a crazy man from Austria who destroyed California with himself and his doings. We can rebuild these things. We know how to do it. Just turn our people loose. Give them a mission, give them some funding, let them live, let them get a place to work, let them go to work, get the farmers back in business, get the industries back in business, reverse what has been done in the recent decades. That's all we have to do. It's going to be a hard struggle, but let's keep it simple. Let's start from a very simple decision called Glass-Steagall. Let people understand what Glass-Steagall means for them, what it makes it possible for us to do, and start to do it.
Well, on that theme, it has been confirmed that at the end of this coming week, September 7th, which is this coming Friday, a week from today, there will be a town hall meeting sponsored by Congressman John Conyers, officially in Detroit, on the subject of the bankruptcy of Detroit and on the question of the legality of whether or not the pensions of the city workers can be abrogated at the expense or for the benefit of the fulfillment of the obligations to the Wall Street banks. Now, your approach to this question has been unique and indispensable over the recent weeks. Bill Roberts, who is a member of the policy committee there and a former candidate for Congress, has been consistently meeting with members of labor, city elected officials, and others, and is continuing to bring the issue of the retooling of the machine tool sector that Detroit represents to the table as the only exit strategy from this situation. Now, what constantly comes up, and I think this is something that you just referenced, is the fallacy that people have that all you're going to do is just fix the problems, fix it, repair the things that have already been broken, and fill some potholes and something like that. But you've constantly been emphasizing that the only metric that you can actually bring to history is one which is at least a century in its span. And then when you begin to subdivide a century into generations, you get 4 cycles of 25-year generations. And the idea of economic reproduction, not just a reproduction of the ability of the last generation or the last cycle to support itself, but as has been called an expanded reproduction, the ability to move beyond anything that you came before, requires this idea that you've just been addressing of leaps in technology. How can we get this idea across, which is in the bones of the American people? This is what we experienced under Franklin Roosevelt and experienced under John F. Kennedy, but it seems woefully to have been forgotten. How can we get this idea adequately across to the American people?
Go back to the first and second decade of the last century, when the accounting was invented. And it was the banking system which invented the accountant and prescribed what the accountant was allowed to do and not do, which created this whole mess. Now, the accountant's mentality is actually a conditioning if he follows his rules. His condition is to act like a monkey. What I mean by that is that he's not supposed to be creative. He's not supposed to be noetic. He's not supposed to invent. He's not supposed to change the rules. Now, the changing of the rules is a very ancient practice for mankind. It goes back 1 billion years or so. And that is that mankind, unlike the animals, voluntarily increases the productivity of the human individual. In principle, not just in form, in principle. And because mankind is the only creature which goes from lower levels of energy flux density to higher, the only species. And the success of the human species depends upon those conditions under which that kind of development is occurring. Now, if you have an accountant comes in and tells you you've got to be practical, and you say, well, take all practical men and put them in the zoo where they belong, because they are not creative. You take the human species. We started with a little fire down there in Africa. That's the first track we had on it. And you had 2 people that looked like monkeys with their behavior, but one was using fire, the other was not. The one who was not using it turned out to be the monkey or the ape or whatever. The one who did use improvements through the beginning of fire became the human beings. Now, the human beings have made developments. How? By increasing the energy flux density per capita of the human species. We're now at the thermonuclear fusion level of hot. Now, that's our level on Earth and beyond Earth. And you've got people who are still sitting there with green eye shades, at least of the past, a memory of the green eye shade, saying that they're simply going to do, by fooling with the numbers of an accountant's number book, are going to determine what the policies of the nations are. That's idiocy. It's always the increase of the energy flux density, which the human mind can muster, And we're now in the thermonuclear fusion age. And if you want to decide how to deal with the problem of the United States and Europe and so forth and the planet as a whole, you've got to get into the thermonuclear age. It has been here for some time. I became acquainted with it very closely back in the beginning of the 1970s. And this thing is now getting riper and riper and riper, despite being held back. We are now in a position where we can begin to really move to take charge of Mars. I'm not recommending putting people on Mars, but I am for putting useful objects on Mars which can do things which we need to get done there. So therefore, there are no limits. We're at the thermonuclear age and beyond. And we've got to understand that. We've got to use those kinds of technologies. We've got to grow up. We are not monkeys. Monkeys will do the same thing. They will follow their tradition all the way around. But we're not monkeys. We're human beings. And we will always go to higher orders of energy flux density because we're truly human. We are unique. We're the only species we know in the entire universe so far. There are probably other people out there who have some knowledge, but from our knowledge, no. We on Earth are the only thing which has intelligence. And intelligence is creativity. Human intelligence is creativity per se. We're now at the age of thermonuclear fusion, headed toward matter-antimatter development. Let's recalculate everything on that basis.
Okay. This will be one final question. You remarked yesterday that you can see the current situation in the form of a counterpoint, as if it were the tale of two cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And as you've just been saying, our future, either way, your future will be determined by thermonuclear technology, either be it thermonuclear fusion or thermonuclear war. And with that quality of truly awesome potential for the good or the very evil staring us in the face in the days to come, as you said in the beginning of this broadcast tonight, the fundamental question that comes out of all of this is, where is the source of moral courage to do that which is necessary in the face of a situation like this? And I think for somebody who is on the verge of your 91st birthday, the truly unique role that you have played through your entire life, and the difference that is so substantially clear between the courage that you have and others who have finked out in one regard or another, is the lesson that has to be taken if we are to win the fight to save civilization today. So I think it would be appropriate, maybe as a final note for this broadcast tonight, if you could make some comments on that.
Well, it's rather simple, you know. Once you understand what a human being should be, it means that the human being is always obliged to reach beyond everything they knew beforehand and discover that and go on to discover the next thing. That is the characteristic of the human being. For the one who's sitting there and has a small fire to cook his food in some place in South Africa, where the monkey in the next place doesn't use fire and remains a monkey forever. That is essentially the lesson to be taken care of. Therefore, the human being should always be of that nature. We have to, if you can't do something better than was done before, what are you doing? You're just repeating old things again? No, the human, human beings' achievement, like in simple farming in the United States, for example, the development of agriculture in the United States, the development even earlier in the previous century, before the thing was crushed. So that always is progress. What the United States represented from its beginning as an American state was always go to the future, go to the higher level, don't be stuck in the mud, always find the better, always find the greater. That's human. If you're stuck in the same old thing again and again and again and never go to the future, you ain't much of a human being. It's the meeting the challenge of making something better, make it better, make it better, is the cry of everyone from a simple craftsman to anyone else. Make it better than it was before. And that is the characteristic, because when you think about that mankind starts from a simple fire, a simplest kind of fire, and goes through various steps of higher energy flux density, all the way to thermonuclear fusion and beyond now. That's mankind. And that's the way we should educate our children, and educate our population, and educate our legislators the same way. We must do better. The trick of everything is to do better. And that means going to higher energy flux densities. We went from a simple fire, mankind. We went through various chemical levels of higher degrees of power used by mankind. We have now reached the point where we have some control over thermonuclear fusion, which is way beyond anything any of our ancestors ever knew. Maybe except in the 1890s, some of our friends there from that age were on that. That's what it is. The point is, your identity has to be, what are you doing to improve the future? That should be the motto of every person. That should be the dedication of every person. What are you going to do to make things better? What are you going to do to make things more progressive, more powerful? Increase the power of mankind. How are we going to deal with the problems of these big objects which are threatening to kill mankind, wipe mankind out by one single blow of an asteroid? We always have to go ahead. We have to go ahead, do better, do better, do better. If you're not doing better, you're not doing anything.
Well, thank you very much. That's the conclusion to our webcast tonight. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Jason. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned. Good night.